My name is Clara, and I'm 32 years old. For the last 10 years, my parents have described my life with one word: pathetic. The main piece of evidence for their verdict was my small one-bedroom apartment in a pre-war building they loved to call a charming little shoebox. They mocked it at every family dinner, every holiday, every phone call. But last Tuesday, during a dinner where they tried to corner me into ruining my financial future for my golden child brother, they pushed too far. They stood in my living room laughing about my pathetic little life, and that's when I decided to tell them the truth. They froze when I finally said the words, "I don't just rent this apartment, I own the entire building." If you've ever felt underestimated by the people who are supposed to believe in you the most, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And before I tell you how I turned the tables on my own family, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe, because this is a story about how the quietest people often have the most powerful secrets. Before that fateful Tuesday, my life was by my own standards a quiet success. I work as a freelance graphic designer, specializing in user interface and branding. It's not a flashy job like my older brother Mark's. He's a surgeon, the golden child, the one whose name my parents drop at every opportunity. I, on the other hand, am the artistic one, a term they use with a mix of pity and confusion, as if I'd chosen a life of voluntary poverty. My world is one of color palettes, vector graphics, and tight deadlines lived out from the cozy corner of my apartment that I'd converted into a home office. I made a good living, a very good living in fact, but you wouldn't know it from the outside. I drive a reliable 10-year-old Honda. I buy my clothes from thrift stores because I love unique finds, not because I have to, and I live in an apartment that values character over square footage. This quiet, understated life was a constant source of disappointment for my parents, Robert and Helen. From the moment we were born, Mark and I were cast in two very different roles. He was the star, and I was the supporting actress in the movie of his life. I remember when he got accepted into medical school. My parents threw a lavish party at a country club inviting over 100 people. My father gave a tearful speech about the Dr. Hamilton legacy continuing. When I received a full scholarship to one of the top design schools in the country a year later, my mother's response over the phone was, "Oh, that's nice, dear. Just be sure you're learning a real skill." There was no party, no proud announcement. Just a quiet suggestion that I should probably take some business classes as a backup. This pattern continued into our adulthood. Every milestone of Mark's was a cause for family-wide celebration. His first surgical rotation, his engagement to a woman from a wealthy family, the purchase of their sprawling 6-bedroom house in the suburbs. Each event was documented, praised, and held up as the gold standard. My achievements were met with polite but dismissive interest. When I landed my first major client, a well-known tech startup, my father's only comment was, "Are they paying you on time?" These internet companies can be flaky. The most consistent target of their criticism was my home. I moved into my apartment right after college. It's in a beautiful, historic part of the city, a brick building from the 1932s with hardwood floors, a charming, albeit tiny kitchen, and a lovely view of a tree-lined street. I fell in love with it instantly. To my parents, it was a symbol of my failure to launch. "Clara, when are you going to move into a real adult apartment?" my mother would ask every time she visited, running a finger over my vintage non-granite countertop. This place is pathetic. It's the kind of place people live in when they're just starting out, not when they're in their 30s. My father was more direct. "I don't understand why you pour money down the drain on rent for this shoebox when you could be investing in property," he'd say, conveniently ignoring the fact that they had gifted Mark the down payment for his mansion. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. One Christmas about 2 years ago, they and Mark's family came over before we all went out to a fancy dinner. My sister-in-law, a woman who had never worked a day in her life, looked around my living room and said with a little laugh, "Oh, Clara, this is so cozy." "It reminds me of my first dorm room," Mark chimed in. "Don't worry, sis. One day you'll get a place with a real dining room." They all laughed, and I just stood there smiling tightly, the carefully prepared appetizers on my small coffee table, suddenly feeling inadequate. It wasn't just about the apartment. It was about me. In their eyes, my life, my choices, my very existence was less than. I was the before picture and Mark was the after. I learned to live with it. I built walls around my heart, keeping the details of my career and my finances to myself. They didn't know about the high-profile projects I worked on under non-disclosure agreements. They didn't know that my little hobby earned me more in a single project than my father's yearly salary. They didn't know because they never asked. They had already written my story for me, and they weren't interested in any edits. I let them believe what they wanted because it was easier than fighting. It was a fragile peace, but it was peace nonetheless. I had thought that this dynamic, this painful but stable imbalance would last forever. But I couldn't have known that a new dream of my brother's was about to become my nightmare, threatening to shatter not just my peace but my entire future. I had spent a decade building a life they couldn't see, a fortress of independence they couldn't imagine. What I didn't realize was that they were about to bring a wrecking ball to the front door. The wrecking ball arrived in the form of a Sunday dinner invitation. It was an email from my mother with the subject line, "Urgent family meeting. Big news." My stomach immediately twisted into a knot. In my family, big news was always about Mark, and urgent family meeting meant they needed something from me. I reluctantly accepted, mentally preparing myself for another evening of being a spectator to my brother's success. I arrived at my parents' house, a place that felt more like a shrine to Mark than a family home. His university degrees were framed on the wall, his marathon medals were displayed on the mantelpiece, and the latest photos of his perfect family were on every available surface. I, on the other hand, was represented by a single, dusty photo from my high school graduation. Mark and his wife Amelia were already there, looking smug. My parents were buzzing with an almost manic energy. "Clara, you're here. We have the most wonderful news," my mother chirped, pulling me into the dining room. We sat down and my father, beaming, made the grand announcement. "Your brother, after years of being the top surgeon at his hospital, has decided to branch out on his own. He's going to open his own private cosmetic surgery clinic, the Hamilton Center for Aesthetic Excellence," Mark added, puffing out his chest. "It's going to be state-of-the-art. We've already found the perfect location downtown." I offered my congratulations, a genuine smile on my face. It was an impressive goal, and despite our complicated relationship, I never wished him ill. "That's amazing, Mark. It sounds like a huge undertaking." "It is," my father said, his tone shifting from celebratory to serious. "And it requires a significant amount of capital. We've pulled together most of our savings, and Mark and Amelia are leveraging their house, but we're still facing a small shortfall on the business loan. The bank needs a little more security." And then all eyes turned to me. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This was it, the reason for the urgent meeting. "The thing is, Clara," my mother began, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness, "the bank would feel much more comfortable if the loan had one more co-signer. Someone with a stable income and good credit." I stared at them, speechless. They couldn't possibly be asking what I thought they were asking. Co-signing a business loan for millions of dollars, it was insane. "We know it's a big ask," Mark said, leaning forward with a look of feigned sincerity. "But this is for the family. When the clinic takes off, and it will, we'll all benefit. This is how we build a legacy." My mind was reeling. A co-signer is just as responsible for the debt as the primary borrower. If Mark's clinic failed, I would be on the hook for millions. My savings, my assets, my entire future would be wiped out. It was a risk no sane person would take. I don't know," I stammered. "That's a huge financial responsibility. I'd need to think about it." The warmth in the room instantly evaporated. My father's face hardened. "Think about what, Clara? This is your brother. This is your family. We don't think about helping family, we just do it." "But this isn't like lending him a few $100s, I protested, my voice barely a whisper. "This is a multi-million-dollar loan. And it's a guaranteed success," my mother interjected, her voice rising. "Your brother is a brilliant surgeon. Are you saying you don't believe in him?" It was a classic manipulation tactic, twist my valid financial concerns into an emotional betrayal. I felt the walls closing in. This wasn't a request. It was a demand wrapped in the language of family loyalty. My initial shock was quickly being replaced by a slow-burning anger. For years they had dismissed me, mocked my career, and treated my life as insignificant. But now, when they needed my good credit and my hidden financial stability, they were suddenly preaching about the sanctity of family. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. They saw me not as a daughter or a sister, but as a resource, a tool to be used for the golden child's advancement. I left that dinner with a non-committal answer, a sick feeling in my stomach, and the distinct sense that a storm was coming. I just didn't realize they were prepared to unleash a hurricane to get what they wanted. The hurricane began the very next morning with a phone call from my mother. It was the first of what I would come to call the guilt trip campaign. "I just can't sleep, Clara," she began, her voice heavy with sorrow. "To think that you would hesitate to help your own brother achieve his dream. It breaks my heart. After everything we've done for you." I gripped the phone, trying to remain calm. "Mom, this is a massive financial risk. It's not personal." "Of course it's personal," she cried. "Family is always personal. We're not asking you to give us money just to sign a piece of paper. It's a formality. A formality that could bankrupt me." The first conversation ended with her hanging up on me after I refused to give an immediate yes. That was just the opening salvo. The next day, my father tried a different tactic, cold, dismissive logic. "Clara, you're being emotional," he said, his voice clipped and businesslike. "I've seen the business plan. The projections are solid. This isn't a risk. It's an opportunity. Frankly, it would be a smart financial move for you to be tied to this. It's probably the best investment you'll ever make, considering your situation. My situation. My pathetic little life in my shoebox apartment." The condescension was so thick I could barely breathe. "Dad, my finances are my own responsibility, and I'm not comfortable with this." "Responsibility? You live paycheck to paycheck on your little drawing projects," he scoffed. "What do you know about real financial responsibility? We're offering you a chance to be part of something real, and you're throwing it away because you're scared." The pressure was relentless. It was a coordinated, multi-front attack. If my mother's emotional blackmail didn't work, my father's belittling lectures would follow. When I started screening their calls, Mark took over. He ambushed me at my favorite coffee shop, the one place I went to escape and sketch. He sat down opposite me, his expensive suit a stark contrast to my worn jeans and hoodie. "Look, sis," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. "I get it. You don't understand this world. Numbers this big probably scare you. But you need to trust Dad and me on this. We know what we're doing." He then proceeded to lecture me for 10 minutes about asset management and leveraging capital using jargon he knew. I understood, but pretending I didn't. It was the ultimate display of arrogance. He wasn't trying to convince me. He was trying to intimidate me into submission. The campaign escalated a week later. They showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Saturday morning. I opened the door to find all three of them standing there, my mother holding a box of pastries, as if this were a friendly social call. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by," she said, breezing past me. They spread out in my small living room, their presence making the space feel even smaller. And then the true purpose of their visit began. It was a calculated assault on my home, and by extension on me. "You know, Clara," my father said, running his hand along my bookshelf, "if you co-sign the loan once the clinic is profitable, Mark could help you get a down payment on a decent condo. You wouldn't have to live in a place like this anymore." "He's right," Amelia, who had magically appeared with Mark, chimed in. "This building is so old. I'd be worried about the plumbing. And the wiring." She looked around with a theatrical shudder. "This is precisely why we're doing this," my mother said, placing a hand on my arm. "We want a better life for you. By helping Mark, you're really helping yourself escape all this." She gestured vaguely at my life's work, my comfortable home, my cherished belongings. They circled me like vultures, picking apart every aspect of my life, using my own home as a weapon against me. They saw my contentment as a lack of ambition, my frugality as a sign of failure. Every word was a carefully crafted jab, designed to make me feel small, insecure, and desperate enough to do whatever they wanted. I tried to defend myself. I like my apartment. I'm happy here. Mark laughed. Nobody is happy here, Clara. People settle for this. We're offering you a way out. All you have to do is sign a paper. I felt myself starting to doubt my own reality. Was I being selfish? Was I really letting fear hold me back from helping my family? Their relentless psychological pressure was starting to work. The constant barrage of criticism was chipping away at my self-esteem. That evening, I called my best friend Sarah in tears. I told her everything, the loan, the pressure, the ambush at my apartment. Sarah had known me since college and had witnessed my family's dynamics for years. She listened patiently until I was done, and then she said the words that would become my lifeline. "Clara, this isn't about helping family," she said, her voice firm and clear. "This is financial abuse. They are trying to bully you into taking an insane risk for their own benefit, and they are using your love for them and your own home as a weapon to make you feel worthless. Do not, under any circumstances, sign anything. You are not their safety net. You are not responsible for funding your brother's ego." Hearing it from an outside perspective stated so plainly was like a splash of cold water to the face. She was right. This wasn't love. It was manipulation. They weren't trying to lift me up. They were trying to use me as a stepping stone, and they didn't care if I drowned in the process. My resolve hardened. The doubt they had planted began to wither, replaced by a cold, hard anger. I knew then that I wouldn't sign, but I underestimated just how low they were willing to stoop. Their next move wouldn't just be an ask or a demand. It would be a public declaration designed to leave me no escape. After my call with Sarah, I made a decision. I sent a polite but firm group text to my parents and Mark. "Thank you for the offer to be part of the new clinic, but after careful consideration, I have decided that I cannot co-sign the loan. It is a financial risk I am not willing to take. I wish Mark the best of luck and hope he finds another way to secure the funding." I hit send and turned off my phone, my heart pounding. I knew the fallout would be immense, but I felt a sense of relief. I had finally drawn a line in the sand. For 2 days there was silence. A terrifying, unnerving silence. I almost allowed myself to hope that they had accepted my decision and were moving on. But on the 3rd day, I received an invitation. Not a text or a call, but a formal, embossed invitation card in the mail. "You are cordially invited to a dinner celebrating the launch of the Hamilton Center for Aesthetic Excellence." It was to be held the following Saturday at the Grandview, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. My blood ran cold. They were throwing a celebration for a clinic that wasn't even funded yet. It made no sense. At the bottom of the invitation was a handwritten note from my mother: "Please, Clara, be there. It's important for the family to present a united front." Against my better judgment, I decided to go. I thought that maybe, just maybe, this was their strange way of showing they were moving on, that they had found another investor. I wanted to believe that despite everything, we could still be a family. It was a naive hope, and it was about to be shattered in the most public and humiliating way possible. I walked into the private dining room at the Grandview to find not just my parents and Mark, but my aunts, uncles, and close family friends, about 20 people in total. They had assembled an audience, a jury. The dinner was tense. My parents and brother were overly gracious, treating me with a kindness that felt utterly fake. They talked excitedly about the clinic, about the architects they'd hired, the equipment they were ordering. It all felt surreal, like a play where I was the only one who didn't know my lines. Then, just as dessert was being served, my father stood up, tapping his glass for a toast. "I'd like to thank you all for coming to celebrate this momentous occasion," he began, beaming at Mark. "As you know, my son is about to build an incredible legacy, and legacies are built on the foundation of family." He paused, and his eyes found mine across the table. His smile was cold. "Building a dream like this takes courage and support. And while some of us were initially hesitant, he said, his gaze unwavering, "I am so proud to announce tonight that the entire family is now fully behind this venture. My daughter Clara, after some soul-searching, has graciously agreed to co-sign the final loan documents with us, ensuring this dream becomes a reality. Let's raise a glass to Mark and to family unity." The room erupted in applause. People were smiling at me, congratulating me. My aunt leaned over and whispered, "That's so wonderful of you, dear." I was frozen in my chair. The air had been sucked from my lungs. This wasn't a celebration. It was a public execution. He had lied. In front of everyone, he had announced that I had agreed, effectively trapping me. If I corrected him now, I would be the villain, the selfish sister who embarrassed her father and sabotaged her brother in front of the entire family. If I stayed silent, my silence would be taken as consent. It was the most brutally effective act of manipulation I had ever witnessed. They hadn't just ignored my no, they had publicly erased it. They had stripped me of my voice and my choice. I looked at my brother, who was raising his champagne glass to me with a smug, triumphant smirk. I looked at my mother, who was dabbing her eyes with a napkin, playing the role of the proud, emotional matriarch. They had planned this. This was their checkmate. In that moment, something inside me broke. Not my spirit, but the last fragile thread of hope I had for our relationship. The years of being dismissed, of being the lesser child, of being their ATM, their tool, their convenient afterthought, it all coalesced into a single, clarifying point of rage. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. The room fell silent. I didn't say a word. I just picked up my purse, looked directly at my father with a gaze as cold as ice, and walked out of the restaurant. I walked out of that restaurant not with tears in my eyes, but with a cold, clear plan forming in my mind. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They had no idea they had just pushed me into my throne. The drive home from the restaurant was strangely calm. The rage that had propelled me out the door had cooled into a diamond-hard resolve. The shock had worn off, and what was left was a clarity I hadn't felt in years. For a decade, I had played their game. I had been the quiet, accommodating, pathetic daughter. That person was gone, left behind in that opulent dining room. When I got back to my apartment, my safe, mocked, underestimated apartment, I didn't pace or cry. I walked to the antique wooden filing cabinet in my office, a piece I had lovingly restored myself. I opened the bottom drawer, a drawer they had never seen, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound portfolio. The title on the front was simple, Project Nightingale. This was my secret. The one I had kept for 4 years, not out of shame, but for self-preservation. 4 years ago, I was deep in the freelance world when I was headhunted for a contract position. It was a stealth-mode tech startup run by a Silicon Valley prodigy. The project was massive design, the entire user interface and branding identity for a new social media app. The work was grueling, the hours were insane, and I was bound by an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. For 9 months, I poured every ounce of my creativity into it. I lived and breathed that project. The app launched and became an overnight global phenomenon. It was called Echo. My work was hailed by critics as intuitive, elegant, and revolutionary. But because of the NDA, my name was never publicly attached to it. My payment, however, was not quiet. Per my contract, I received a flat fee plus a small percentage of the company's valuation after the first year. When Echo was acquired by a tech giant for an astronomical sum, my small percentage became a life-altering windfall. I was, to put it simply, a multi-millionaire. The first thing I did wasn't to buy a mansion or a sports car. The first thing I did was secure my future and my peace. I hired a top-tier financial advisor and a savvy lawyer. We created an LLC, a limited liability company, to act as a shield, a way for me to make investments anonymously. And my very first investment was the building I lived in. The owner, an elderly man looking to retire, was happy to sell quietly off-market. Through my LLC, I purchased the entire 4-story, 8-unit building. It was the smartest decision I ever made. The mortgage on the building was less than the combined rent from the other 7 tenants, meaning the building paid for itself and generated a steady income. I was my own landlord, living rent-free, and no one was the wiser. The building manager, a kind man named Mr. Henderson, was the only one who knew the real owner was the quiet designer in apartment 3B. I had kept this secret for one reason: my family. I knew with absolute certainty that if they ever found out about my wealth, they would see it not as mine, but as a family resource to be exploited for Mark's benefit. My quiet life was a deliberate camouflage. Now sitting in my office with the portfolio in my lap, I knew the time for camouflage was over. They had declared war. It was time to show them my arsenal. The next morning, I was on the phone with my lawyer, David Chen. They did what he asked, his voice sharp with disbelief after I recounted the dinner party. They publicly announced I was co-signing a loan I had already refused, I repeated. They're trying to force my hand. That's not just manipulation, Clara. That's bordering on fraudulent misrepresentation, David said. What do you want to do? I want to end this, I said, my voice steady. Permanently. I want to arrange a meeting. My parents, my brother and me. But this time, it's on my turf. And you'll be there with me. Consider it done, he said. What's the location? I looked around. My beautiful, underestimated apartment. Here, I said. It's time they had a proper look at the place. Over the next few days, David and I prepared. We gathered all the necessary documents, the formation papers for my LLC, the deed and title for the building, my complete financial portfolio showing my net worth, and a copy of the ECHO contract with the NDA terms highlighted. We also drafted a formal cease and desist letter to be presented if necessary. David also advised me to get a new appraisal on the building. The results came back the day before the meeting. In the 4 years since I had purchased it, the property value in my historic neighborhood had skyrocketed. The building was now worth nearly double what I had paid for it. The plan was simple. I would invite them over under the pretense of discussing the loan terms. I would let them walk into my home, my territory, with their usual arrogance and condescension. I would let them make their final pitch. And then I would dismantle their entire worldview piece by piece with cold, hard facts. They wanted to talk about finances. Fine, we would talk about finances. I sent the invitation for Tuesday evening. My mother's reply was instant. We'll be there. So glad you've finally come to your senses. Oh, they had no idea. Senses were about to be shattered, but they wouldn't be mine. Tuesday evening arrived with a heavy, charged stillness. I spent the afternoon preparing not a meal, but a stage. I tidied my apartment, arranged my best design work on my coffee table, and set up a folder with all the documents David had prepared. My lawyer was due to arrive 10 minutes after my family, a strategic delay we had planned. At exactly 7 p.m., my doorbell rang. I took a deep, steadying breath and opened it. My parents and Mark stood there, their faces a mixture of relief and smug victory. They thought they had won. "Clara, darling," my mother said, kissing the air next to my cheek as she walked in. "I'm so glad you decided to be reasonable." "It's a smart move, sis," Mark added, patting me on the shoulder in a way that was meant to be reassuring but felt deeply patronizing. "You won't regret this." They settled into my living room, my father immediately launching into business mode. "All right, Mark has the loan papers here. We just need to go over the cosigner addendum with you, and then we can all sign. We've already booked an appointment with the bank manager for tomorrow morning." He placed a thick stack of papers on my coffee table right next to my portfolio. "Before we get to that," I said, my voice calm, "and even I have a few things I'd like to discuss first." My father waved his hand dismissively. "Clara, all the discussions have been had. It's time for action." "No," I said firmly. The change in my tone made him pause. "It's time for clarity. For years, the three of you have made it abundantly clear what you think of my life and my home. You've called this apartment pathetic, a shoebox. You've pitied me for my little drawing projects. You've treated me as a failure." My mother sighed dramatically. "Oh, Clara, don't be so sensitive. We only want what's best for you." "No, you want what's best for Mark," I corrected her. And you've decided that I am the tool to achieve that. You believe I am so desperate to escape this pathetic life that I would risk my entire financial future for him. This isn't about you, Clara Mark, snapped his patience wearing thin. This is about the family legacy, something you clearly don't understand sitting here in this rental. The doorbell rang. It was David, right on cue. I opened the door and introduced him. This is my lawyer, David Chen. He's here to oversee our discussion. My family exchanged confused and alarmed glances. A lawyer? What on earth for my father? Demanded his face flushing with anger. For clarity, I repeated, sitting down and gesturing for David to do the same. You see, you've all been operating under a series of very profound misunderstandings. Let's start with the first one, my career. I opened the Project Nightingale portfolio. You call my work little drawing projects. 4 years ago, one of those little projects was designing the entire user interface for an app called Echo. A flicker of recognition crossed Mark's face. Echo, the social media app, it sold for billions. That's the one, I said. As part of my compensation, I received a percentage of the company's valuation. So, misconception number 1, I am not the struggling artist you imagine me to be. I am financially independent. In fact, I'm financially more secure than all 3 of you combined. A stunned silence fell over the room. My mother stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. My father's face was a thundercloud of disbelief. Which brings me to misconception number 2. I continued picking up another document from my folder. You constantly mock my home. You call it a rental, a shoebox, a drain on my resources. I slid the document across the table. It was the deed to the building. This is the deed for 125 Elm Street. That's this building. It's owned by a private LLC called Nightingale Properties. And this, I added, sliding over the LLC's formation papers, shows that I am the sole owner of Nightingale Properties. I let the words hang in the air. I don't rent this apartment, Dad, I said, looking him directly in the eye. I own it. And I own the one above it, the one below it, and every other unit in this building. I have for 4 years. The silence was absolute. The color drained from my father's face. My mother looked like she was going to faint. Mark just stared at the papers, his mind clearly struggling to process the information. And finally, I said, pushing the new appraisal report towards them, you called my home pathetic. According to this certified appraisal from last week, this pathetic building is now valued at just over $4 million with 0 mortgage. It's an asset, a very profitable one. I leaned back in my chair. So to recap, I am not poor. I am not a failure. And I don't need rescuing. My life is not pathetic. In fact, it's a life I built myself in secret to protect it from the very kind of entitlement and greed you have all displayed for the past month. David chose that moment to speak. As Clara's legal counsel, he said, his voice calm and professional, I must advise her in the strongest possible terms against co-signing any loan. It would be a catastrophic financial decision and completely unnecessary. My father finally found his voice a strangled whisper. You've been lying to us. For years. No, I said. I've been private. There's a difference. You never asked about my life, you just made assumptions. You saw what you wanted to see, the struggling artist who needed you. The truth is, I haven't needed you financially for a very long time. But you, it seems, need me now. I picked up the loan documents from the table and handed them back to Mark. So no, I said, my voice ringing with a finality that echoed in the silent room. I will not be co-signing your loan. Not today. Not ever. This meeting is over. They stared at me, their world completely upended. For the first time in my life, I held all the power, and I was just beginning to understand what I was going to do with it. The moments after my revelation were surreal. My family sat frozen like statues in a museum of shattered arrogance. My father opened and closed his mouth several times, but no words came out. My mother was pale, her hand pressed against her chest. Mark was staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, not pity, but something that looked terrifyingly like respect. It was David who broke the silence. He stood up, gathering his briefcase. "I think we're done here," he said politely but firmly. "Clara, I'll be in touch tomorrow." He gave me a small, encouraging nod and let himself out. His departure seemed to break the spell. My father shot to his feet. "How could you, Clara? How could you deceive your own family like this?" "Deceive you?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "I lived my life. You're the ones who created a fantasy about it because it made you feel superior. I didn't lie. I just stopped correcting your fiction." "We could have helped you invest," Mark blurted out, the surgeon's mind already calculating the financial implications. "You could have made so much more money with Dad's guidance." The absurdity of his statement was breathtaking. "You mean you could have made more money?" I retorted. "My investments have done just fine, Mark. For starters, I own a $4 million building that pays for itself." "How's your portfolio doing?" He had no answer. My mother finally spoke, her voice a trembling whisper. "So all this time, when we offered to help, you were laughing at us, no, Mom?" I said, a wave of sadness washing over me. "I was wishing you'd see me. The real me, not the character you invented. I never wanted your money or your help. I just wanted your respect. I wanted you to be proud of me for who I am, not for who you wanted me to be." There was nothing left to say. The foundation of our relationship, built on a power imbalance of their own making, had crumbled to dust. They walked out of my apartment, my building, without another word. They looked smaller, diminished. The power they had held over me for 3 decades was gone, and they seemed lost without it. The moment the door clicked shut, I felt an overwhelming wave of relief. It was like I had been holding my breath for my entire life and could finally exhale. I walked through my living room, touching the familiar objects: the worn velvet armchair, the bookshelf filled with art books, the collection of ceramic birds on the windowsill. This wasn't a pathetic shoebox. This was my sanctuary, my fortress, my victory. That night, I slept more soundly than I had in years. The next morning, the silence from my family continued, but my world was anything but quiet. I called Mr. Henderson, the building manager. I told him I was ready to take a more active role and that I was dissolving the LLC to put the building under my own name. I authorized him to begin getting quotes for renovations, new windows, an updated lobby, and a communal rooftop garden for the tenants. I also made a call to my financial advisor. "It's time to stop hiding," I said. "Let's move some of these investments into my name. I'm thinking of starting a small foundation." For the first time, I felt completely and utterly free. I was no longer Clara, the struggling artist. I was Clara Hamilton, a successful designer, a property owner, an investor, the woman my family had never bothered to get to know. I spent the rest of the week in a creative frenzy, sketching out plans for the rooftop garden, redesigning my own apartment with the new furniture I'd always wanted, but had put off buying, and brainstorming ideas for my foundation, which would provide scholarships to promising young design students from low-income backgrounds. The weight of my family's judgment, a burden I hadn't even realized I was carrying, was gone. And in its place was a thrilling, terrifying, and beautiful sense of possibility. My real life was just beginning. The silence from my family lasted for weeks, but I knew it couldn't last forever. The only question was what form their next move would take: an apology, an attack, or something else entirely. 5 months. In 10 months, the seasons in the city turn, storefronts change, and the world moves on. For me, in the 10 months that followed the night my family's world was upended, I didn't just move on. I moved up in every sense of the word. The quiet life I had secretly built was no longer a secret, and stepping into the light changed everything. The most visible transformation was the building itself. What my parents had called a pathetic shoebox became a testament to what happens when something old and full of character is given the love and resources it deserves. The dim, narrow lobby was now a bright, welcoming space with a beautiful terrazzo floor I'd uncovered beneath layers of old linoleum. The walls were a gallery rotating art from local artists, some of whom were my tenants. But the crown jewel was the rooftop. What had been a barren, tar-covered space was now a lush garden, a shared oasis of potted olive trees, fragrant lavender, and comfortable seating areas where you could see the city skyline. I'd hosted a tenant appreciation party up there in late summer. It was a warm evening with fairy lights twinkling above us and the sound of laughter mixing with the distant city hum. Miss Henderson, the building manager who now worked for me with a renewed sense of purpose and a handsome raise, pulled me aside. "You know, Clara," he said, looking around at the happy faces in all my 20 years managing this building, "I've never seen anything like this. You haven't just renovated a property, you've built a community." I felt a lump form in my throat. This was the legacy I wanted, not a name on a clinic, but a place where people felt they belonged. My professional life had undergone a similar public renovation. The decision to step out from behind my non-disclosure agreements was terrifying, but it was the right one. My new website, which I designed myself, was a clean, elegant testament to a decade of hard work. The centerpiece was a case study on Echo detailing my creative process. Within a month, my inbox was flooded. The calls weren't just from startups anymore. They were from the kind of global brands I had only dreamed of working with. I had to expand. I hired 2 junior designers, both sharp, hungry, and full of talent, and a project manager to keep us all sane. Our office was the beautifully restored commercial space on the ground floor of my building. Waking up and taking an elevator down to a job I loved in a building I owned, surrounded by a team I respected. It was a feeling of security and accomplishment, so profound it sometimes felt unreal. The Clara Hamilton Design Scholarship became my heart's project. The first 2 recipients were Maria, a brilliant illustrator from a family of immigrants who worked 3 jobs to support her, and Leo, a coding prodigy who designed stunning web interfaces but couldn't afford the tuition for a top-tier tech program. At the award luncheon, Maria's mother hugged me, tears streaming down her face, whispering in Spanish, "You have given my daughter a future." In that moment, I understood the true power of my wealth. It wasn't about buying things. It was about buying freedom and opportunity, not just for myself, but for others who, like me, had been overlooked. And my family, their journey over these 10 months was a slow, painful crawl out of the rubble of their own making. The initial aftermath of our showdown was, as I'd heard from my Aunt Susan, chaotic. My father, his pride wounded to the core, had apparently stormed out of my building and not spoken to anyone for 3 days. My mother had cycled through bouts of weeping and furious phone calls to my aunt, trying to paint me as a cruel, secretive dragon hoarding my gold. Mark, however, bore the most immediate consequences. As I knew he would, he was unable to secure the business loan without a financially sound cosigner. The bank, my aunt reported, had looked at his and his parents' leveraged assets and politely declined. The perfect downtown location for his clinic was leased to a dental group a month later. His grand dream, the Hamilton Center for Aesthetic Excellence, died before it could even be born. The fallout was brutal. His wife, Amelia, whose support had been contingent on a future of lavish success, was not pleased. Their arguments became the stuff of family legend, whispers of thrown objects, and threats of divorce. Mark was forced to stay at his hospital job, but his colleagues noticed a change. The confident, charismatic surgeon was replaced by a sullen, resentful man who felt his destiny had been stolen from him. The first attempt at contact came from my mother about 2 months in. It was a text message, short and stunning in its denial. "Hi, darling. Thinking of having the family over for Sunday roast. Let me know if you can make it." She was trying to pretend nothing had happened, to simply reset the board and put all the pieces back in their old places. The old me might have caved just to keep the peace. The new me typed back a calm, firm reply. "Thank you for the invitation, but I won't be able to attend. I'm not ready for a family dinner until we have an honest conversation about what happened." Her response was a single wounded word: "Fine." Another month passed. Then she called. Her voice was different, no manufactured cheerfulness, no guilt-laced sighs. It was just tired. "Clara, would you be willing to meet me for coffee, somewhere public?" We met at a small cafe halfway between my apartment and her house. She looked older. For the first time, I saw the cracks in her perfectly composed facade. She stumbled through an apology, a rambling speech about how she and my father had poured all their hopes into Mark, how his success felt like their success. "We just got lost," she confessed, staring into her cup. "We put you both in these boxes, and we couldn't see past them. When we saw your little apartment, we didn't see your independence. We saw our own failure to provide you with what Mark had. It was never about you, Clara. It was always about us. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was the truth, and for the first time I felt a flicker of empathy. It didn't excuse her actions, but it explained them. I didn't offer forgiveness, not yet. But I offered a path forward. Our relationship has to be different now, Mom. It has to be based on who I really am, not who you thought I was. My father was a much tougher nut to crack. His pride was a fortress. I heard from my aunt that he refused to even say my name for months. The turning point, she said, came when he saw Mark's life unraveling. My father, a man who worshipped at the altar of success, was watching his golden child fail while his written-off daughter was quietly building an empire. It broke his brain. He didn't call. He showed up. He buzzed my apartment one Saturday afternoon. I almost didn't let him in. He stood awkwardly in my newly redecorated living room, a space that was now airy modern and unapologetically me. He didn't compliment it. He just looked around, taking it all in. "I was wrong," he finally grunted, looking at a framed architectural print on my wall instead of at me. "About the loan. About everything. It was a bad business proposition, and I let my pride get in the way. You made the smart move." For my father, admitting a business error was the closest he would ever get to admitting an emotional one. He then changed the subject, asking me about the real estate market in my neighborhood, about my thoughts on a particular tech stock. He was in his own clumsy way asking for my respect. He was speaking to me as he would speak to a peer, a fellow investor. It was the biggest concession he could make, and I accepted it as such. Mark was the last. His fall from grace was the hardest. Amelia had taken the kids and moved in with her parents for 2 months. Faced with an empty mansion and a dead-end dream, he was forced to confront his own reflection for the first time. He called late one night, 10 months after the showdown. His voice was raw, stripped of its usual arrogance. "I saw the article online about your scholarship foundation," he said quietly. "There was a picture of you with the 2 students. You looked happy." "I am," I said simply. There was a long, heavy silence on the line. I could hear his breathing. "I get it now," he whispered, his voice cracking. "All my life I've been chasing things. The title, the big house, the perfect family. I needed everyone to see how successful I was. You never needed any of that. You just did the work. You were successful all along, and I couldn't stand it. It made everything I was working for feel hollow." He took a shaky breath. "I'm sorry, Clara. I am so, so sorry. I wasn't just a bad brother. I was a blind one. And there it was. The justice I had been seeking wasn't revenge. It wasn't watching his life fall apart. It was this. It was the moment of clarity. The moment the blinders came off and he finally truly saw me. The balance had been restored not by tearing them down, but by forcing them to acknowledge the woman I had become while they weren't looking. I had found a fragile peace with my family, built on a new and honest foundation. But as I navigated this new world, I realized the most important reconciliation wasn't with them. It was with myself, and with the quiet, underestimated girl I had been for so long. It's a funny thing about cages. Sometimes the bars aren't made of iron. They're made of love, or at least what you're told is love. For 32 years, I lived in a cage constructed from my family's expectations, their narratives, and their carefully curated blindness. It was a comfortable cage in some ways, insulated by a fragile peace, but it was a cage nonetheless. The night I laid out the truth on my coffee table, I didn't just unlock it for myself. I rattled it for every single one of them, forcing them to see the bars they had so diligently helped build. As I stand on my rooftop garden, now watching the city lights begin to glitter like a fallen constellation, I often trace the path from that moment to this one. The journey wasn't a straight line to victory. It was a winding, often painful process of excavation. I had to dig through layers of learned behavior, of deep-seated familial roles, and of my own complicity in the dynamic that had defined my life. The money I've come to realize was never the point. It was merely the catalyst, the geological pressure that revealed the fault lines that had been running beneath the surface of our family for decades. The greatest lesson I learned, the one that truly set me free, was about the nature of power and self-worth. For so long, I believed my power lay in my secret. I thought hoarding the truth of my success was a form of self-preservation, a shield against their judgment and greed. I saw it as a hidden fortress, but I was wrong. My secret wasn't a fortress. It was a prison of my own making. By hiding my true self, I was implicitly agreeing with their assessment of me. I was living a life edited for their comfort. I was playing the role of the pathetic daughter because I was terrified of what would happen if I auditioned for a different part. I was afraid of the conflict, afraid of the fallout, afraid of losing the conditional love I had worked so hard to maintain. My real power wasn't born from a bank statement. It was forged in the fire of public humiliation in that restaurant when I stood up and walked away. In that moment, I chose myself. I chose my dignity over their narrative. I chose the cold, terrifying unknown of their disapproval over the warm, suffocating certainty of their control. The money didn't buy my freedom. My courage did. The money was just the tool that allowed me to turn that single act of defiance into a sustainable new reality. It gave me the leverage to ensure they could never put me back in that cage again. This realization led to a deeper, more personal reckoning. I had to confront my own why. Why had I allowed this dynamic to persist for so long? The answer I found was rooted in a profound misunderstanding of what family and love are supposed to be. I grew up believing that love was transactional. To be loved, I had to be accommodating, quiet, and undemanding. I had to make myself small so that my brother could seem bigger. I thought that was my role, my contribution to the family's happiness. Peace, I believed, was the ultimate goal, even if it came at the cost of my own authenticity. But what I've learned is that peace without respect is not peace. It's suppression. Love without truth is not love. It's a performance. A healthy family is not one devoid of conflict. It's one where conflict can be navigated with honesty and a fundamental baseline of mutual respect. My family didn't have that. They had a hierarchy, and I had spent my life dutifully playing my part at the bottom of it. The process of rebuilding my relationships with them has been like learning a new language. The old language was one of subtext of unspoken rules and veiled criticisms. The new language is one of boundaries. It's a language I had to teach them, and it started with simple but revolutionary phrases like, "No, I'm not comfortable with that," or "When you say that, it makes me feel disrespected," or even, "I'm not going to discuss my finances with you." At first, they struggled. My mother would lapse into her old habits of emotional manipulation. My father would try to assert his authority with unsolicited advice. But I held firm. Every time they crossed a line, I would calmly but clearly restate the boundary. It was exhausting. There were times I wanted to give up, to retreat back into the familiar silence. But then I would look around at the life I had built, the thriving business, the beautiful home, the scholarship students with their bright futures, and I would remember what I was fighting for. I was fighting for the woman who had built all of it. I was fighting for her right to be seen, to be respected, to exist fully and unapologetically in her own family. And slowly, painstakingly, they began to learn. My relationship with them today is not the picture-perfect ideal my mother always dreamed of. It's not loud and boisterous and constantly intertwined. It's quieter, more deliberate. It's marked by a respectful distance. We can have dinner and talk about the world, about art, about their recent vacation. We don't talk about Mark's career struggles, and we don't talk about my net worth. We have found a new, more stable ground built on the truth of who we all are. Now, not on the fictions of who we were. Perhaps the most surprising part of this journey has been forgiving myself. Forgiving myself for not speaking up sooner. Forgiving myself for prioritizing their comfort over my own truth for so long. But I've learned to look back at that younger version of myself with compassion. She wasn't weak. She was a survivor. She did what she had to do to navigate a system that was rigged against her. She protected herself by being invisible. I don't resent her anymore. I'm grateful to her. Her quiet resilience, her secret hard work laid the foundation for the life I live today. She walked through the fire so that I could rise from the ashes. So if my story can offer anything, it is this: your worth is not a subject for debate. It is not something to be granted or revoked by a committee of your family members. It is an inherent, unchangeable fact. Do not let anyone, no matter how much you love them, convince you to build your life around their limited vision of who you are. Their perception is a reflection of their own fears, their own insecurities, and their own narratives. It has nothing to do with your reality. You are the author, the architect, and the sole proprietor of your own life. You get to decide what it looks like. You get to define what success means. And you absolutely have the right to build a fortress of self-respect that no amount of judgment or manipulation can penetrate. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your family is to teach them how you need to be treated. And sometimes that lesson can only be taught by walking away from the table and building a new one for yourself, one where you are always seated at the head. I want to open this conversation up to you all now because I know I'm not alone in this experience. Have you ever felt like you were cast in a role in your own family that just didn't fit? A role that required you to be smaller, quieter, or less than you truly are? What was the moment you realized you had to break free from that script? Please share your stories in the comments below. Your journey could be the lifeline that someone else needs to read today. If this story has touched you, if it has made you feel seen, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our community. We believe in the power of sharing our truths. And if you know someone who is struggling to be seen for who they are, who is being made to feel small by the people who should be building them up, please share this video with them. Thank you for being here, for listening. And remember, in the grand, beautiful, and sometimes messy architecture of your life, you are not the guest. You are the owner. Live in it proudly.